I never believed in alien theories, though I was always fascinated by space. Like most people, I thought all those stories were just made up for entertainment. But everything changed one terrifying night when I witnessed something that couldn't be explained. That evening, the sky was particularly clear, with not a single cloud in sight. I stood in my backyard, smoking, when I noticed a few bright lights appearing on the horizon. They weren't moving like airplanes or satellites. It was something else, impossibly fast and completely unnatural. I froze, trying to comprehend what it could be. But then they started changing shape. They didn't just move across the sky, they moved in ways no human-made vehicle could. The lights remained still for a few seconds, then started moving with unimaginable speed, making sharp turns and bends. I didn't know what to think. At that moment, I thought it was just some anomaly, something I could explain later. But when I got home and reflected on it, I realized it was something much more. The next day, panic began to spread through the town. Those who had seen the lights started talking about them at every corner. But there was something strange in their conversations. People who were once confident in their beliefs started doubting what was real. Some said it was a normal light phenomenon, some thought it was a secret military experiment, and some started claiming it was first contact with aliens. But no one knew what it actually was. A few days after the lights appeared, people started disappearing. At first, it was just a few small incidents, people leaving their homes and not returning. They'd say they were going for a walk in the evening and then just vanish. No trace, no sound. It was so strange that people began whispering that something was wrong in our town. When one of my neighbors went missing, I felt something wasn't right. I'd known her my whole life, and she wouldn't just disappear like that. She didn't have any enemies, no debts, no reason to hide. And that feeling didn't leave me. Then I met Jenna, a girl who had also noticed strange things in the town. We started talking about what was happening, and when she told me that her brother, one of the missing, had left behind strange traces that led into the woods, I decided I had to figure it out. The night we went looking for him marked the beginning of the nightmare. We followed the traces, hoping to find some clue. Suddenly, I heard a strange noise. I turned around and saw something dark and fast slip between the trees. It was impossible. Something invisible was following us. Something we couldn't understand. Disappearances began happening more frequently. People who had tried to search for their missing loved ones also vanished. A few days ago, one of the town's most respected women, Mrs. Powell, went missing. She just stepped outside for a few moments, and that was it. No one ever saw her again. It became unbearable. I knew I couldn't stay on the sidelines. I decided to take matters into my own hands and investigate. At first, I thought it might just be a series of criminal acts, maybe a maniac hiding in the woods. But the more I searched, the more I realized it was something else entirely. While searching, I stumbled upon an old laboratory on the outskirts of town. It had been abandoned for years, and no one knew who owned the place. But when I snuck inside, I realized something unusual had happened here. The laboratory was covered in dust and cobwebs, but among all the mess, I found several old surveillance cameras. I connected one to my laptop and started watching the footage. Honestly, I expected to find something like old scientific experiments or even psychiatric research, but what I saw shook me to the core. On the screen, I saw footage from external cameras, and I witnessed strange figures, tall, thin, with incredibly long limbs, emerging from a foggy light in the woods. These were not humans. They moved in ways that seemed unnatural, as if the air around them was dense and viscous, as if they weren't part of our reality. And their eyes. They were so black that it seemed like they were absorbing everything around them. On another clip, they stood next to houses. At first, they were almost invisible, but then they started materializing, and it became clear they hadn't come just to observe. These beings had come for something. I didn't know what to do. I felt like I was being buried under an avalanche of time, and all I could do was keep investigating the laboratory. I knew I had to find answers. The documents I found spoke of a Project X that had been conducted in this town decades ago. It was a project about alien technology research. The documents didn't directly state what had been discovered, but I understood that these beings had been here far longer than we thought. And they weren't just observing us, they had started manipulating us, using some kind of devices. I kept digging through the papers, and among them, I found a report that made my heart stop. These creatures didn't just make contact with humans, they had been using humans as puppets. At some point, they began affecting people's minds, manipulating their thought processes. With each passing day, I felt like something invisible was following me. The tracks on the ground became more apparent, deep, as though something incredibly heavy had passed, but leaving only strange indentations. These weren't animal tracks, they seemed like something mechanical, with claws designed to cut through the earth. I followed the tracks to where they led, and soon I found myself at the same place I had seen in the footage. It was the woods, but not the ones I knew. This forest felt alive, with trees too tall, branches stretching toward each other as if trying to cover the sky. I felt a presence in the darkness. And then I realized I was being watched. I found strange metallic objects hidden in the ground. At first glance, they looked like old machines, but as I examined them further, I realized they were devices capable of manipulating the human mind. These machines emitted high-frequency waves designed to control people's thoughts, to make them do what the creatures wanted. I understood then that these beings hadn't come for our planet. They were looking for something. They were seeking control. And worst of all, they had already begun that control. Anyone who entered their influence zone was transformed into their puppet. I couldn't believe what was happening. But then I met them. I was standing in the woods when suddenly I felt the darkness close in around me. I turned around and I saw them. They didn't look like humans. Their bodies were thin and tall, with long arms that moved as though driven by inertia. Their eyes were black as coal, and it seemed like they were absorbing everything around them. I couldn't move. My body was paralyzed by fear. I realized then that these creatures hadn't just come here in peace. They had come for our souls, for our minds. The moment they began approaching, I felt my head fill with thick fog. My thoughts started unraveling, and I began to lose track of what was happening, who I was. My consciousness began to dissolve as though someone was erasing me from reality. I tried to resist, but I couldn't. Every word they spoke, every thought they implanted, seeped into my mind. And I couldn't stop it. When I came to my senses, I wasn't sure if I was even alive anymore. Everything around me was distorted, as though reality was breaking apart into pieces. I felt something cold touch my skin. I was no longer sure if this was the end, or if this was just the beginning of something far worse.